The weight of new ground. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of wild grass rippling under the late August wind. Sarah Mackenzie stood at the edge of their claim, her hand shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun as she watched her father guide the plow through reluctant earth. The soil here was different from Ontario, harder, drier, holding secrets in its depths that refused to yield easily. Sarah! Her mother's voice carried from the house, a simple structure of rough-hewn logs and sod that had taken them most of their first year to build. The water barrels nearly empty. Sarah turned from watching her father's struggle. At 17, she'd grown accustomed to the endless cycle of tasks that defined prairie life. Water hauling, bread baking, tending the vegetable garden that barely survived in this unforgiving climate, mending clothes until the fabric gave up entirely. She missed the green abundance of Ontario, the way rain fell reliably, the way neighbors lived close enough to visit without planning an expedition. The well they dug last spring had started producing less water each week. Her father insisted it was temporary, that the water table would rise with the fall rains. But Sarah had seen the worry lines deepen around his eyes, heard the conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Inside the house, her mother Eleanor stood at the rough wooden table, kneading dough with practiced efficiency. At 42, Eleanor Mackenzie carried herself with a quiet strength that had only intensified since they'd left civilization behind. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a practical bun. Flour dusted her worn calico dress. "Take your brother with you," Eleanor said, not looking up from her work. "He's been underfoot all morning, and the fresh air will do him good." The 10-year-old Thomas sat in the corner, whittling a piece of wood with more enthusiasm than skill. He looked up at Sarah with hopeful eyes. "Can I bring my slingshot? Pa said there might be prairie chickens near the creek." "We're fetching water, not hunting," Sarah said, but she smiled despite herself. Thomas was the only one who seemed to find adventure in their circumstances rather than hardship. "But bring it anyway. You never know." They hitched their mare, Daisy, to the small cart and set off toward Willow Creek, a thin ribbon of water that ran 2 miles south of their claim. The journey took them past the abandoned homestead that had haunted Sarah's thoughts since they'd arrived. The previous family, the Hendersons, according to the land agent, had simply vanished one winter, leaving behind a half-collapsed soddy and a barn with strange markings carved into its remaining beams. "Why do you always look at that place?" Thomas asked as they passed. "It gives me the shivers." "Because someone's story ended there," Sarah said quietly, "and nobody seems to know why." The land agent had been evasive when her father pressed for details. "Bad luck," he'd said. "The frontier isn't for everyone." But Sarah had found things in their own fields. A child's broken doll, a rusted tin cup, a leather-bound journal so water-damaged the words had blurred into illegibility. Ghosts of a family that had tried and failed. "Pa says we won't fail," Thomas said, as if reading her thoughts. "He says the Mackenzies are made of sterner stuff." Sarah didn't answer. Her father, James Mackenzie, had been so certain when they'd left Ontario. The Dominion Lands Act promised 160 acres for a $10 registration fee. Land of their own, a fresh start, prosperity for those willing to work for it. He'd sold their small farm back east, packed up everything they owned, and brought them west on the railroad with dreams burning bright in his eyes. 3 years later, those dreams had dimmed considerably. At the creek, Sarah filled the barrels while Thomas skipped stones across the sluggish water. The creek was lower than she'd ever seen it, exposing rocks and mud that should have been submerged. If this drought continued, even this lifeline might disappear. "Someone's coming," Thomas said suddenly, pointing north. A rider approached on a dark horse, moving at an easy canter across the open prairie. As he drew closer, Sarah recognized Daniel Thornton, the son of their nearest neighbors 5 miles east. The Thorntons had arrived the same year as the Mackenzies, and while the families weren't close, they'd helped each other through various crises: a barn raising, a difficult calving, the time Eleanor had taken sick with fever. Daniel was 20, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He reined in his horse and tipped his hat to Sarah, his gray eyes serious. "Miss Mackenzie, Thomas." He nodded to each of them. "I was heading your way," Got news from town. Sarah's stomach tightened. News from Medicine Hat was rarely good. What kind of news? The bank's calling in loans early. Some trouble with Eastern investors pulling out. My father heard it from the storekeeper yesterday. Daniel's jaw was tight. A lot of homesteaders took loans for seed and equipment. If they can't pay, he didn't need to finish. Sarah knew exactly what her family owed. $200 for the seed wheat that had mostly failed last year. Another $50 for the plow that kept breaking. $30 more for supplies they couldn't do without. Her father had been confident they'd pay it back after this year's harvest. But the wheat was thin and sparse, struggling in the drought-stricken soil. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. 30 days, maybe less. Daniel shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but I thought you should know before the bank agent comes calling." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "That's kind of you to ride all this way." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Concern, or perhaps something more. "Your family's good people, Sarah. If there's anything we can do, we'll manage," she said automatically, though she had no idea how. "We always do." After Daniel rode off, Thomas looked up at her with worry creasing his young face. "Are we going to lose the farm?" "No," Sarah said firmly, praying she wasn't lying. "Pa will figure something out. He always does." But as they loaded the water barrels and started the slow journey home, Sarah's mind raced through impossible calculations. $280. It might as well have been 2,000. They had no savings. Every penny went to survival. The harvest wouldn't come in for another month, and even then, with the drought. When they returned home, her father was unhitching the plow horses, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the late afternoon hour. James Mackenzie was a big man, broad-shouldered and strong, but 3 years of prairie life had carved away any excess. His dark beard was streaked with dust, his hands calloused and scarred from endless labor. "Good haul?" he asked, nodding toward the water barrels. Sarah climbed down from the cart, trying to find the right words. "Pa, Daniel Thornton came by," he said. "I know about the bank," James cut her off, his voice flat. "Rode into town myself yesterday." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Something in James's tone had alerted her. "James?" He looked at his wife, then his children, and Sarah saw something she'd never seen before in her father's eyes. Not just worry, but fear. "We need to talk, all of us, inside." The family gathered around the rough table, the bread dough sitting forgotten to one side. James sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. "The bank's calling in the loans," he said without preamble. 30 days to pay in full or they take the claim." Eleanor's face went pale. "All of it? But we have 3 years invested." "The Dominion Lands Act doesn't protect us from private debts," James said bitterly. "I signed papers, put up the land as collateral. I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought this year would be different." "How much?" Eleanor asked quietly. $280. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Thomas looked between his parents, not fully understanding but sensing the gravity. Sarah's mind was already working through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. "Could we sell the cattle?" Eleanor suggested. "Or the horses? The cattle would bring maybe $40, and we need them for winter." "The horses," James rubbed his face. "We can't work the land without horses, and even if we sold everything, we'd still be short." "There must be something," Sarah said. "Someone in town who could extend the loan, or—" "I already asked," her father said. "The bank's the only game in town, and they're not budging. Too many homesteaders in the same situation. They want their money now." Silence settled over the table. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Sarah thought of the Henderson place, abandoned and slowly crumbling back into the prairie. Would their home suffer the same fate? Would some future family find traces of the Mackenzies and wonder what had become of them? "There might be one option," James said slowly, reluctantly. "But I don't like it." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What option?" "There's a man in Medicine Hat, Cornelius Blackwood. He's buying up claims from homesteaders who can't make it, offering to pay off their debts in exchange for the land." "And then what?" Eleanor demanded. "Where would we go? Back to Ontario with nothing? We sold everything to come here, James. Everything." "I know that." James's voice rose. Then he caught himself, lowering it with visible effort. You think I don't know that? But what choice do we have? At least we'd walk away without debt. We could start over somewhere else. No. Eleanor's voice was steel. We don't run. Not from this. We came here to build something, and that's what we'll do. With what? James asked, spreading his hands. With prayers and wishes? The land won't give up what it doesn't have, Eleanor. I've worked myself to the bone, and it's not enough. It's never enough. Sarah watched her parents face each other across the table, saw the weight of 3 years of struggle pressing down on them both. Her mother, who never complained about the endless work, the isolation, the fear. Her father, who'd promised them prosperity and instead delivered hardship. What about the wheat? Sarah asked. If we harvest early, maybe we could. It's not ready, James said. Another 3 weeks at least. And even then, with the drought, we'll be lucky to get half what we need. Then we need to find another way, Eleanor said firmly. We have 30 days. That's time enough to think of something. But Sarah could see her father didn't believe it. Could see him already surrendering, already planning their retreat. And something in her rebelled against that acceptance, that quiet admission of defeat. That night, after Thomas had been put to bed and her parents had retreated to their own room for whispered conversations, Sarah sat by the dying fire and stared into the embers. The house creaked around her, settling into the cooling earth. Outside, the prairie stretched vast and indifferent, under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She thought of Daniel Thornton riding all that way to warn them. Thought of the mysterious Cornelius Blackwood. Buying up failed dreams. Thought of the Henderson family and their unexplained disappearance. 30 days. Sarah had never been to Medicine Hat alone. Young women didn't travel unescorted, didn't involve themselves in business matters, but these weren't normal times. If her father had given up, if her mother's determination had no practical plan behind it, then perhaps it fell to her to find a solution. She rose and moved to the small wooden chest that held her few possessions. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was her grandmother's silver locket, the only thing of value she owned. It had been in the family for 3 generations, passed from mother to eldest daughter. It might be worth $10, maybe $15. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. As Sarah tucked the locket back into its hiding place, she noticed something odd. The floorboard beneath the chest sat slightly higher than its neighbors. She'd never paid attention before, but now, in the firelight, the difference was obvious. Curious, she moved the chest aside and pried at the board. It came up easily, revealing a small, hollow space beneath. Inside was a leather pouch, old and cracked with age. Sarah's heart hammered as she opened it. Inside were letters, 3 of them, yellowed with time, addressed to someone named Margaret Henderson, the previous family. She unfolded the first with trembling hands. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Margaret, he knows. We have to leave tonight. Take only what you can carry. Don't trust anyone in town, especially not Blackwood. He'll say anything to get the land. The mine is real. I found the entrance yesterday, exactly where the old Métis trader said it would be. But Blackwood found out somehow. We're not safe here anymore. Burn this letter. Sarah read it twice, her mind reeling. A mine? Cornelius Blackwood? The same man her father had mentioned, the one buying up homesteads? She reached for the second letter, but before she could open it, she heard footsteps. Quickly, she shoved the letters back into the pouch and replaced the floorboard, sliding the chest back into place just as her mother emerged from the bedroom. Can't sleep? Eleanor asked softly. Sarah stood, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet ask. Just thinking. Eleanor moved to stand beside her daughter, both of them staring into the dying fire. We'll find a way, she said. We didn't come all this way to fail. Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on letters hidden beneath floorboards, on a family that had fled in the night, on a man named Blackwood, who seemed to be at the center of something dark and hidden, and on a mine that might or might not exist, somewhere on this endless prairie, 30 days to save their home. Sarah had a feeling that was only the beginning of their problems.